Hello, this is Brooks Whittington with halfwheel.com. Today we're taking a look at the Benchmade 1500 cigar cutter. Now, Benchmade is a very popular knife company that has produced any number of creations over the years. But in 2018, it introduced its first cigar cutter, the 1500 181. That carried a retail price of $1,000 and was limited to just 250 units. Now, that cutter was followed by subsequent models until August of this year, when it announced that it was producing a single guillotine blade that was regular production and priced at only $250. The 1500, which is what this is, shares a similar design with the original version, but the handle is made of Rich Light, which is a material made of resin-infused paper that is water-resistant, sanitary, and is both heat and fire-resistant. The blade on this cutter is CPM S30V stainless steel with a hardness level between 58 and 60 and is only 0.09 inches thick. It weighs just 3.95 ounces and measures at 4.185 inches long, which, as you can see here, is about 3/4 of a dollar bill. Retail price, as I mentioned, is $250 on this cutter. It is a regular production, and it does feature a very nice leather sheath with the price that fits the cutter like a glove. Now, as I mentioned, Benchmade introduced the 1500 181 back in 2018. This is that cutter here. Now, there were quite a few problems that I had with this cutter, and starting and almost ending with the fact that it is very difficult to get a clean cut off of it. And you can see when you actually cut a cigar with it that there is damage with the actual cut itself. Now, a lot of times this damage is minor that I got from it, but it still is fairly inconsistent in terms of getting a clean cut. But that wasn't the only issue. The $1,000 price tag when not getting clean cuts was also fairly significant problem when it comes to that specific cutter. Now, the company decided to redesign a little bit of the cutter itself to come out with this newer version, the 1500. And what they decided to do was they decided to change up where the blade was inside of the actual cutter itself. And it is difficult to see, no doubt, but you can actually see that the blade on the interior, perhaps you can see it, is closer to the edge of the handle on the newer version than it is on the older version. There's quite a bit less space in between on the newer version. And what that does is it gives the actual blade a little bit more stability when you're actually cutting it, the cigar cap, and it gives you a little bit cleaner cut on those more consistently for sure. Now, there is some issues still with how clean the cuts are on this, which we'll get to in a minute. All right, now that we have all that out of the way, it's time to actually show how to use this cutter. So as I mentioned before, this 1500 is a single guillotine blade, and it's opened by pulling back on this lever here, which is embedded into both sides of the handle. This opens the blade up. As you can see, it closes as well very, very securely using that axis locking mechanism that honestly is one of the best parts of the cutter that Benchmade decided to put into it. It's very, very secure. There's no issues with that whatsoever. Every time you use it, it's solid, and very, very nice to actually be able to open up and close. Feels great in your hand. When you're actually going to use the cutter, you put the base of the cutter into the palm of your hand. You can see there's a curve there, and you put it into the palm of your hand with these 4 fingers here to support it. You put your thumb onto the top of the blade. You put the cap of the cigar into the opening, and then you push through in a nice even motion, and that cuts the cap off. So in order to actually cut the cigar, there is one thing you want to make sure about when you're actually using the blade, and that is that the logo side, that is the side here with the Benchmade logo on it, is always going to be on the same side as the larger part of the cigar that's left over that you're going to smoke, while the smaller end of the cap that's being cut off is always going to be on the side with no logo and with the beveled edge, as you can see here. Once you realize that, you realize which way you need to have the cutter every time you cut it. You'll know if it is not correct, because it will destroy the cap even more than normal. All right, so as I mentioned before, you want to make sure that the logo side, the Benchmade logo side, is the same side that you have the large part of the cigar you're going to actually smoke is on, and the non-logo side with the beveled edge is the same side that the cap, the smaller piece of the cap, is going to fall off of. So you take the cap of the cigar, you put it into the opening. You want to make sure you can get as close as you can to knowing exactly how much you're taking off. It's very difficult with this cutter, and that's one of the things I really didn't like about it. You can get close, especially if you're looking at it from above, but then you have to actually turn the cutter in order to make sure you're cutting correctly and putting the right amount of force onto it. So you can only get just so close to knowing exactly how much you want to take off. But once you have that approximate location, you put it in, and you basically just push down with your thumb and cut through. So, as you can see, a pretty decent cut on that one. It does have some minor pieces there that are coming off, but no major damage at all. And I'd say this is probably 40% of the time is the same cut you would get with this cutter. Better than the first version, as I mentioned, especially with the number of times that you don't have any major wrapper damage. So I thought as part of the review, we'd go over some comparisons really quickly of the Benchmade 1500 181 and the 1500, which we're reviewing today. Now, when Benchmade introduced the 1500 181 in late 2018, it had the MSRP of $1,000, and one of the reasons that was the case is that the cutter was part of Benchmade's Gold Class, which is Benchmade's top-of-the-line series, and it's basically what the company considers to be just below a custom knife. The items are limited. They use more expensive materials. For example, in the 181, the handle of this is carbon fiber, which is not cheap. The blade is actually made of S90V steel. It is a limited edition out of 250, and there are actually gemstones in the trigger mechanism, as you can see here. So all of these things and a few others equals a very expensive cutter. Now, since 2018, the company has introduced other variants at various price points and various materials. All of them are very different in terms of how they're constructed. For example, there was a $450 model all the way up to a $1,200 model. The $1,200 model has Damascus steel for the metal, for the blade, while the others, had various options in terms of handles material. There was the one with burl wood for the handle, and things like that. They switched in and out in order to make different price points. And so when they wanted to make a cheaper model, a more budget-friendly model, they decided that for the 1500, they would go with a few different options that would bring that price point down. One of those is the rich light handle, which we've already talked about. There's no gemstones on the trigger mechanism, as you can see here. And in addition, the S30V steel for the cutter mechanism, the blade, as well as the fact that it is not a limited edition, it is a regular production item. And all of these things equal a more budget-friendly, the most budget-friendly version of this cutter. All right, so now that we've got that over with, let's go through a list of advantages, disadvantages, good things, and bad things that I found as I was using this for about a month on every cigar that I reviewed. Start with the bad things. First of all, the most important thing, it just does not cut cigars as cleanly as it should. The design that it has is better because of the fact that the blade has been moved a little bit closer to the edge, as we mentioned before. It's a better design, and it cuts better than the 1500 181 for sure. But it's still not as clean as it should be. It's still, cuts are still problematic. They still have some major issues with cutting, damaging wrappers and damaging the caps. And, sometimes it's minor, sometimes it's not minor. But there's definitely some issues with the majority of the cuts that you get with this cutter. Another bad thing is the fact that you can't really see where you're cutting when you're actually cutting the cap off of the cigar. So in any situation, you want to be able to tell exactly how much you're cutting off of that cap. And the problem is that when you're looking at this here, through this thing is very, very, very non-specific. Now you can get close, but in terms of knowing exactly how much you're cutting, there's just really not that much of an easier way to do it and get this cutter inside the palm where it's nice and cradled like it should be, supported. You can do it from the top. You can try from the top, but again, it's not the easiest thing in the world to see. And once you turn it around like this to actually cut it with it supported the way it should be, you lose that exactness of exactly what you're cutting. Another thing is the fact that you can't really cut anything above about a 60 ring gauge with this cutter. It's very difficult to get anything through there that's more than about 60 ring gauge. And if you have something even larger, say a 70 or something of that nature, you're going to be SOL in terms of getting anything more than just a little bit off the cap off of that. And finally, basically the price is a big issue. $250 is better than the $1,000 of the original model for sure, but in terms of the return on investment of how much you get for the cuts that you get for the money that you pay, it's very, very difficult to justify in that regard. Now there are some good things. Of course, after using it, I found quite a bit that I liked about it. First of all is the exterior handle is made of Richlite, as we mentioned before, and it is really, really fantastic. It's very durable. I had no issues whatsoever with it having marks, damage, anything of that nature. It is solid as a rock, and I don't think there will be any issues in terms of carrying around more and more with me and how I usually carry it, which is typically in a pocket with keys and things of that nature. It looks great when you're actually using it. It's very solid. When you're cutting the cigars, the axis locking mechanism works perfectly every single time. There's no issue with that at all. It's not loose or anything after that much time. It doesn't feel like it's going to get loose, and it's very, very solid when you're actually using it. The balance is excellent as well. There's no problems with the balance and how it actually comes when you're actually using it. The cutter itself, it's a very, very well made and very well designed cutter in terms of actually balance and getting that cap off of there, other than the actual cuts themselves, obviously. Now, it also is made in America and comes with a lifetime warranty, which is very, very nice and not the norm these days. So in the end, after all of that, can I recommend the Benchmade 1500 as a cigar cutter? The answer is no, unfortunately. Look, $250 is a lot of money for a cigar cutter, and I've mentioned this in multiple reviews before over the years. But the idea that you can have a $250 cutter that costs that much, that is built this well, but just can't give you a clean cut consistently, is really just, it's really the point of a cutter is to give you a clean cut. And I can get a better cut more consistently with a $2 cutter that I can buy in any shop in America. Now, it is extremely well constructed. I love the axis locking mechanism on it. I love how it feels when you're actually holding it. I love how it feels when you're pushing through on the cap. It is commendable that Benchmade decided to try and fix the problems that they had with it, and it did actually help noticeably. The cuts were more cleaner, more consistently cleaner, but they just were not still good enough to actually be able to say, yes, I can, pretty much promise that on 90% of the cuts, this is going to cut through. It just did not work that way, unfortunately. I can't recommend it as a daily cutter, and I can't recommend it just based on those issues and the price alone. So for halfwheel.com, this is Brooks Whittington. For any other news, reviews, or really anything cigar related, just go to halfwheel.com.